Hi, my name is Tina Ching. I'm at the University of Oregon in Eugene, Oregon.
Hi, my name is Zanada, Joyner. I'm a reference librarian at North Carolina Central University School of Law Library in Durham, North Carolina.
Hey, I'm Leong. I'm the head of reference at Fordham University's Maloney Library in New York City, New York, and I am currently in Manhattan.
I'm Mike Martinez, the Deputy Director of Administration and Professor at the Sarita Kennedy East Law Library at St. Mary's University School of Law. I'm currently in San Antonio, Texas, but that's where we're at.
I'm Dennis Prieto. I'm one of the reference librarians at the Rutgers School of Law in Newark. I'm currently at my home in Trenton here, and I'm glad to be here.
I'm George Taoultsides. I'm the manager of faculty research and scholarly support at Harvard Law School Library in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
So why don't we get started? Let's talk about strategies for managing uncertainty.
And I've got a good question for you, Mike. You guys are getting ready to open up. How are you feeling about that?
So I feel like it's there's a lot of measured anxiety primarily. There's not a lot of information being disseminated from administration to any of the individuals, and I guess what fancy word would be stakeholders of the institution as a whole. I know that students are chomping at the bit to try to figure out what it's going to look like in a live format, if there is going to be one. And I know that there's a lot of discussions being held as to what even the fall semester would look like. So I think the biggest thing, anxiety.
In terms of some of the notes that I had jotted down, I was just struck by this one idea. I heard the writer Gia Tolentino on NPR. She had just talking about being productive during, this time. And she said, there's no way in hell I'm reading Proust right now. And I just thought that makes perfect sense to me. One of the things that I don't really want to be doing right now is coming up with world, renowned, advanced, groundbreaking new methods. That seems like a bad thing to do. Seems like not a way to help manage the anxiety of our students.
Right.
And that's a lot of it, right? Because we kind of have to, we're in a double bind too. We're not only not sure of what's going on, we also have people looking to us saying, well, what's going on?
Right.
I think the strategy is to hunker down and to do what you know how to do, right? Which is provide instruction. One thing that I think is really important for instructors right now, especially since classes are online or hybrid, or there's a mixture of ways the message can get interrupted, is if there's something that is really important that you think your students need to know, you want to make sure that you give it to them in 3 different methods. An email, put it at the top of the syllabus, put it on the Canvas page or something like that, right? Or some kind of separate reminder. Now is not the time to be watching the clock and telling students, oh, look, here, you're 15 seconds late on this deadline.
Right.
Now you've got to be, right? That kind of grading doesn't work in these times, I think.
And I think it changes the modalities of how we deliver it and the expectations of what we have, right? And I think that it's a time to be more open about things. Because as we're, used to classes in school being run on particular modules, like if you're teaching an online class for us in an MJUR program, it comes out on a Wednesday, so it's Wednesday to Tuesday night. And so maybe there's more of an expansion of it in terms of the hours involved, because you also have to take into consideration what people have, what they're doing, what their family situation is, what their electronic resources availability, online status. Those are things that you have to think about. And I think that it allows for opportunity to become more partners with them, students and instructor, sort of collaborating and working together in order to kind of hit to that common goal. Now it's not the time to be the deified professor, right? It's the time to be sort of on level with them.
And helping them manage what they're working through too, at least in terms of the class.
Right.
At the very least, in terms of the class. Right. We're all coming from this from a crazy number of perspectives with a variety of things working. But I think right now, teaching in a pandemic requires being extraordinarily kind.
I think that is such a great sentiment to focus on. And and focusing on our students is really important. I wonder if we should start discussing our students' needs and how to overcome their technological obstacles during this time.
So I know for me, and in the workplace setting, I have two reference librarians that realize their home computers, which they don't really use because we're used to our nice big desktops at work, aren't really up to snuff when it comes to teaching their classes and having a video and audio feed. And it's just not working well for them. And then another librarian's having problems with bandwidth issues, which dovetails right into my classes where I had students where they had to turn off their video because it was causing so many problems when it came to bandwidth. Zanada, do you have anything?
Yeah, so Kelly and I did talk about some of this, and it's a multi-pronged technology consideration. There's the hardware, the literal hardware that do you have the equipment on hand? Can you lend it out? Do you have it to borrow? Can you share? There's the bandwidth issues and connectivity issues, but then there's also software issues that we've run into with our institution. It's also the connectivity across different platforms. And that has been something that we're all learning more. I mean, we always hear our stakeholders asking for more Mac, and then we're in a PC world in our workplace, and then people go home and they have what they have. And it has been very exposing of like how we're not necessarily working on the same ecosystem. And so I would imagine if we couple that to lack of access, that and some of those issues, those equity issues that are always circling around us, now we really have to drill down and figure out how to make this the most inclusive situation for our staff, for our students, for our stakeholders, for the continuity of our programming. So it's been very interesting and not easy, and there's not easy solutions to this too.
Yeah, so looking down into the future of instruction in the fall, we don't know what will happen. And I think we really do have to start discussing these issues for our students' sake, because there are some equity issues involved. I think particularly when we talk about software in my geographic setting, I think bandwidth is definitely a much different discussion when you're outside of really urban areas, because we're seeing connectivity issues across our student base, from affluent communities to less affluent communities. That doesn't seem to be a determining factor. But with hardware, right, a really good PC that can handle doing all these things might cost more potentially, right? So that's something we have to think about our students. Are we going to lend these things out? And then how do we lend them out physically when we're not in the building? Mm-hmm. And then also another thing that's been coming up is, portable Wi-Fi hotspots. So what are we doing with those? Are we going to give those out to students if they are having connectivity issues? Are we going to give that out to staff?
Those are really some interesting, complicating factors that sometimes we don't focus on. And it brings me back to what Dennis and Mike were saying is, I mean, I tell this story all the time, but I was in law school in New Orleans when Katrina hit my second year, and we transferred to the University of Houston's campus, but there were a lot of coping situations. So people said, well, you have your books and it's not that cold, so you don't need a coat. And you don't know where and when people enter this space right now. A lot of assumptions can be made about choices, but we really have to be sensitive to the fact that we don't know, because you just don't know. You don't know what's going on in someone's home. So privacy is something we've been thinking about. So we've been using Teams to do our calls because it's a more secure system, we're told. But again, we don't know who has a situation at home that's not safe, or who's losing. Someone is going to lose if we're not careful about how we move forward. And technology is a very, really tangible example, and there are reasons why people would be uncomfortable with different things. And I think, unfortunately, it's a broad brush for a very delicate situation sometimes. So
all these are great factors to consider and are very important to make sure that all of our students feel safe and secure, right? And I'm glad you brought up Teams. We're using Teams a lot as well, but I know George's team has been using Zoom as far as an online tool to communicate, or not Zoom, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
what is it? Slack.
Yeah.
Slack. George's team has been using.
They're all the same.
Yeah. Well, they're not, right? And I think it'd be really great to hear a little bit more about how you all have been using Slack and how it's been a tool that's really worked for you and your team.
So we've had Slack at the Harvard Law School Library for probably 3 or 4 years, but we haven't been using it as a whole within the organization up until the quarantine these past couple of months. So this quarantine has allowed us within the library to decide on one platform to use, and we've decided to use Slack. And it's worked out, I think, for the best. I think I would call Slack a mashup between email and Facebook. So the two things that most people hate. But it comes out as actually a really positive experience. I think they take the best of email and Facebook and put it in a corporate type of environment, but it's not so corporate where it's feels stilted. There's hundreds of emotes that you can use, smiley faces, hearts, etc. And when you start seeing that from the executive director in your organization and everyone else within the library, then you get a more familial experience, which I think is what we're looking at, or what I prefer within an organization. Some of the cons of Slack are, again, as Tina mentioned, there's so many software platforms to use right now. You can use Microsoft Teams. That's something that I was using in the past. For project management, I use Trello. So having to learn Trello, having to learn Slack, Microsoft Teams, email, Zoom now for everyone, it's time consuming and confusing.
George, does anyone in your institution worry about there being too many platforms?
Yeah, we do. And right now we're confused. Harvard's confused. So I think the official software that people are asked to use is Microsoft Teams. And at the university level, yes, but what we've heard from IT and others is that, well, most people are using Slack, even though it's the unofficial version. I think that's one of the reasons why we're not even paying for Slack at this point in time.
So it's funny you said that, George, because in our institution, we're using Teams, but Teams can add the app of Slack onto it. And you can, right. So we're kind of pushed to Teams, but there are people still adding Slack to their Teams interface. So they're really using Slack. And then you can add the Trello boards too. And then there's a lot of more productivity tools. And it makes me wonder about what Dennis was saying. Is it even realistic to expect that adding, I don't know, I just feel like adding more tools is not going to change the fact that we're all really just not sure what we're navigating through anyway. I mean, you're just kind of dealing with this day by day. So I don't think countdowns and space races and balloons and I don't know. I just don't know if that's going to improve productivity right now, but it's available.
Yeah, that's a great point. And even, once this quarantine lessens, once we start going back to the office, what role will Slack play? What role will Microsoft Teams play within that ecosystem? We still don't know. And again, I don't think we've found a winner yet. I don't think society, like Google has won the search engine race and Facebook social media race. What is going to be this, who's going to win this ecosystem race? We still don't know.
I think it'll just be super interesting to see how we come out of this on the other side with all the things we've talked about, dealing with anxiety in the workplace, dealing with technological issues we hadn't really thought about in great detail because it wasn't necessary, and now it's necessary. And then what kind of optional communication tools have we been forced into that we can bring back and will hopefully improve our spaces? There's a lot to unpack there. Hopefully there'll be some good things that come out of it.
And then also respect to the new changing modalities of work. It's sort of, as we see things going on, and, I think this will definitely emulate what's happening out there. So as we're trying to show students what the changing modalities of work are, for us, but what it will be for them within practice and things like that, I think those are good things to sort of look at.
Yeah, and I think so too.
Mike, that's a whole nother program.
Yeah, that's true.
This program first.
I was thinking too about, I heard from a friend who's visually impaired and who's really enjoying working from home with a lot of these different products because they have some of the accessibility built into them, or it's been developed to visual impairments, hearing impairments, all kinds of different things, anxiety in the workplace. It just seems like thinking about the future. and what we do with these tools. But for some people in our communities, whether they're saying it or not, this really has been a very beneficial time for them as far as being able to connect across the ecosystem of the workplace.